Yeah, I think where they miss it is they just don't even consider cost segregation because it's never crossed their mind. I was just talking to a real estate investor in Central Florida, and they specifically buy Airbnb properties, and we're talking very large Airbnb properties that can sleep 20, 30 people a night. It's literally a boutique hotel,
Okay.
but it's a mansion. And it never crossed their mind to do a cost segregation study. So that's where they're really missing it, is not knowing that it's out there, because it's
Okay.
something that their CPAs just, it was never on their radar, because they always
Mm.
associated it with, if you were to purchase a hospital or if you were to purchase a hotel. So I think it's the smaller investors that just never considered it.
Hello, everyone. Rick Albert here with another episode of The Key to the City of Angels. I'm super excited to have Brian Kiczula of CostSegRx on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, I know the bulk of what we're going to be talking about is cost segregation studies. I've talked about it before, but I always like laws have changed, tax codes have changed, which I'm sure we'll dive into. So I always like to bring people on from a different perspective. How did you get into this space? Let's start there.
Yeah, how do you stumble into cost segregation? Not
Right?
exactly
Because,
a
who doesn't dream
straightforward
about
path.
it?
Yeah, I was originally real estate and mortgages back in San Diego. Got started back in 2002. So all of a sudden, a very long time ago. And fast forward to 2019, I had some health issues that derailed me for literally about a year. And I had to figure out what I was going to do when I started working again. And I figured I would start doing tax returns, low stress role to jump into, and quickly
Sure.
realized it wasn't really what I wanted to do. But then I found cost segregation, and I was able to really marry my real estate background with tax. And that's how it all started.
All right, for those that may not have listened to my previous episodes, shame on them. But let's say they didn't. Can you explain on a high level what a cost segregation study is?
Yeah. So, really, what we're doing with cost segregation, if you're a real estate investor, you're depreciating the rental properties that you own. On residential properties, it's typically 27 and a half years. And on commercial, it's going to be 39 years. What we're going in and doing is we're carving out individual assets in those properties. So, if you think your driveway, your sidewalks, roads, tennis courts, swimming pools, landscaping, fencing, all of that is site improvements, which are asset class 0.3 and have a 15-year tax life. And then on the interior of the property, you have 5-year assets such as removable flooring covers, appliances, window treatments. And what you can do is reclassify those as your 5-year assets. And because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and now the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, you can pull forward 100% bonus depreciation on those short life assets. So all of a sudden, you're able to accelerate the depreciation to offset either active or passive income.
Okay, so in other words, because if everything's over 27 and a half years, on a practical basis, most systems don't last that long anyways.
Well,
We're
that's
like an AC unit doesn't last that long.
that's the whole rub on this cost segregation and kind of IRS rules in general, is they just don't always make sense. So the structural components of the building have to remain in the 27 and a half or 39-year tax life. So
Hmm.
your HVAC system, we know that your compressor, your air handler is going to fail in 10 years. We know your hot water heater is going to fail in 10 years. But because they're part of a unit of property that are tied to the structure of the property itself, they're still straight line depreciation items. And I see taxpayers get that wrong all day long when they're replacing those assets.
Got it. And when do investors do this? Especially now, right? We had this big beautiful bill act. Are you seeing more people doing these studies than they did in the past, or
There's
is it kind
definitely
of
a
staying the
lot more
course?
attention that's been brought to cost segregation with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, bringing back
Mhm.
100% bonus depreciation. So we're certainly seeing an uptick of volume. It's tax season, so we're super busy right now. when is the best time to do a study? I always encourage clients to do the study the same year they acquire the property. I would just put
Oh,
it on your
interesting.
checklist after you close on the property. Contact the cost segregation professional, have them work up an estimate of benefit so you can see what you're looking at. But you can still do look back studies. You can go back and do studies on properties that you acquired years ago.
Okay. And it doesn't really matter if it's a single family home versus a 100-unit apartment building
Yeah,
as
so
far as these.
historically, cost segregation studies have been very expensive to do, and they've
Mhm.
really been in line with commercial real estate investors. Think your large strip malls, think Las Vegas casinos, think Marriott's and hotels. You can do them on residential properties now. So we absolutely do a ton of residential properties. Short-term rentals are booming right now.
Sure. I actually have a client he just bought a short-term rental out of state, out of California, and it was strictly for tax purposes. That was
So
the only reason. Like you think, as long as even if I lost a little bit of money, I still made it up in the tax benefits.
yeah, I always tell clients if you're looking to buy a short term rental and get into that space, really do your homework first, talk to your
Yeah.
CPA, make sure it's really the business you want to get into because you could buy other businesses too. You could buy car washes, you could buy self storage facilities, you could buy hotels. So it's not just short term rentals. And you think the price points, like there's no way I can afford a hotel, but I've seen some $5 million, $10 million short term rentals.
In with some of these businesses, I had a client of mine, he's been buying up businesses. So he built one business, just bought another. But it's like with these SBA loans, it's actually not that expensive to buy some of these.
Yeah, and what we're looking at is so we're specifically talking about the real estate piece. When you're looking at different types of property, not all properties are they're not all equal.
Sure.
Different properties are going to have different site improvements, they're going to have different interior improvements, and they're going to have different levels of accelerated depreciation. So a lot of clients will start out by looking at residential property, but then they'll say, "Hey, maybe getting into the restaurant space works better for me because you have a lot more short life assets," or you start looking at car
Mhm.
washing or other businesses. But
So if you buy up a business because you're buying it for the real estate, but the business basically puts much more wear and tear on the systems, are those tend to be better for the cost segregation study because it's more
it all just
aggressive?
comes back to the individual assets, how they're
Sure.
classified, what type of tax life do they have. Anybody can look up IRS publication 946 or read the audit technique guides
Yeah, because who
regarding
doesn't?
cost seg. Yeah, if you guys have trouble sleeping at night, I tell you, 3 a.m. in the
I
morning, you
believe
wake
it.
up like I do, just open that up and you'll be right back in bed. So,
I believe it.
yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So, and since we talked about the different systems, one of them is because we are seeing a lot of people who are tearing down and rebuilding. We're seeing that a lot in LA. I always called LA very much a tear down city. We love tearing down properties and rebuilding. And so, because the cost segregation studies, sometimes I've heard that it makes sense to actually involve them during the planning phase.
Yeah, so if you're looking to build a property, whether you're completely tearing down the property or you're building it from the ground up, I think that engaging with the cost segregation professional during the design build stage absolutely makes sense because then we could guide you on assets that you may want to include in the property. We could talk about site improvements that maybe you should build on that property or interior improvements so you can really accelerate the depreciation. I always tell clients think of a boutique hotel or a resort style hotel. Most of those buildings and properties, they're built with cost segregation in mind.
So you're saying if you go in, let's say during the planning phase, you might say, hey, we recommend adding a pool because then you can write off the pool equipment versus they may not have thought about adding a pool before. Is that kind of what you're
Or a
thinking?
pickleball court or a tennis court or whatever
Mhm.
site improvement. Maybe don't spend as much money building out all the fixtures and features of a bathroom because bathrooms are pretty much always going to be straight line depreciation, everything in them. But if you start looking at site improvements or other decorative items, then you could accelerate them.
Got it. So if you're building for the purposes of taxes, focus on what you can actually write off.
Yeah, I think, and that's a good point that you bring up. I don't think you should build anything or buy anything strictly for accelerating depreciation for tax benefits. I've
Fair
been in
enough.
real estate a long time now, and you just don't want to chase that rabbit and then get burned in 5 years because it's a poorly producing asset. It's not generating the returns you need it to. So you get the benefits in
Sure.
year one, but then you're stuck paying debt or whatever it is for as long as you hold that property. So you got to be
No,
careful with
fair
that.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
usually tell people, I'm like, let the tax portion be like the icing on the cake.
Oh yeah, secondary.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then what happens though? Let's say I built this property, do the cost segregation study, and then I sell. Because that's what a lot of developers do. They build up these properties, hold on to them for so many years and sell. What happens to all that depreciation? Or are they
Yeah.
just doing a 1031 exchange and it doesn't matter?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of strategies. Anytime I have a client that's they're planning on disposing of the asset in the near term, like the first
Hmm.
couple of years, I would just tell them don't do a cost segregation
Okay.
study because you're going to have depreciation, recapture. You're going to have to pay all that back unless you have a real plan in place to push it forward. Like you said, maybe you're going to sell the property, buy another property through a 1031 exchange. Maybe you're going to sell the property, pay the taxes on it, and then do a lazy 1031 exchange, meaning you're just going to buy a new property and do a cost segregation study on it. You just really
Hmm.
have to have the disposition of the asset in mind before you sell it, and you want to have the
Okay.
conversation with your CPA ahead of time so that you don't make the mistake of selling a property in November and acquiring a property, let's call it in February, and not being able to marry up the same tax year. So really
Okay.
always, and that's what I always just default, call your CPA. You should be on a basis with them. So you could call them periodically, at least quarterly, do a check-in if you're investing in real estate.
That's fair. My dad was a CPA for a long time. And what I learned later on was that he did tax returns. He didn't like him, but he knew he had to do it because that's part of the business. But it was all about the tax strategy and
Yeah,
everything.
absolutely. And we're seeing a lot of CPAs that are building out their practice. So they're more, they're providing guidance when
Mhm.
it comes to tax strategy in not just real estate, but a number of ways. And I really think that's where they need to be.
Yeah.
That's why they went to school. That's why they studied all the extra hours. That's why they passed the test, so they could really advise clients on the best way to legally pay the least amount of taxes possible.
Yeah, I feel like that's where we're heading, just almost as like society, right? It's like we're not just here to do tax returns, we're here as a tax strategist. We're not here just to help you buy or sell a home, we are real estate strategists. Like I just feel like adding that extra like consultative level of service is where we're
Sure.
heading because we're also dealing with bigger numbers now.
Absolutely. In your market, you definitely are dealing with bigger numbers. When you're
Right?
looking at a single family house, or let's not even say a single family home, but if you're buying I don't know, a two-bedroom townhome in
Yeah.
Pasadena for $700,000,
Yeah.
$800,000, and that's a starter property. And then
Yeah.
you start looking at a single-family residence that's a ranch, and it's over $2 million.
Right?
It's pretty wild in California specifically, but there's different markets across the country where you can still get into properties for $100,000,
Oh
less
yeah.
than $100,000. And I still tell those clients, you can call me, just like you said about the CPAs, it's really getting that advice up front. So, why not get the estimate of benefit even on that $100,000 property? Because at the end of the day, I don't really know your full tax scenario. You don't know what you're trying to offset.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's also interesting because I wonder. So I don't know if you saw, it's called Traded LA. I follow them on LinkedIn. They set all like the major sales and like loans for like the commercial world. I'm not as involved, but it's interesting to watch. And Hermes, the big fashion brand, just bought on Rodeo Drive one of the buildings for $400 million.
That is
And
amazing.
right, like just like that, that's such a huge number. But then I know that Macy's has been like their real estate holdings, I think is worth more than the brand itself.
Oh, I'm sure
So,
it is. Yeah, because they've got property in key markets across the
mhm.
country.
So then I wonder if those companies are also considering cost segregations. Like, look, we're trying to offset the fashion company or the brand and offsetting these purchases for the buildings by doing things like cost segregation. Like,
Yeah,
have you seen like a lot of
historically,
business? Yeah,
historically, cost segregation, like I said before, was tied into larger acquisitions, and they
yeah,
are accelerating because it all scales. If you're buying $100,000 home and you offset 20% of it, okay, that's 20 grand. You offset $1 million, that's 200,000. Now you're
right.
$10 million, you're $100 million, you're $1 billion. So it scales depending on what market you're in. There's cost segregation providers that do studies on casinos in Vegas. These are $1 billion buildings.
No, I totally agree. So, where have you seen some of, we'll call them like the hidden opportunities for investors? What are they missing?
Uh,
They're looking at some of these depreciations.
yeah, I think where they miss it is they just don't even consider cost segregation because it's never crossed their mind. I was just talking to a real estate investor in Central Florida, and they specifically buy Airbnb properties, and we're talking very large Airbnb properties that
Mhm.
can sleep 20, 30 people a night. It's literally a boutique hotel,
Okay.
but it's a mansion. And it never crossed their mind to do a cost segregation study. So that's where they're really missing it, is not knowing that it's out there, because
Okay.
it's something that their CPAs just, it was never on their radar, because they always
Mm.
associated it with, if you were to purchase a hospital or if you were to purchase a hotel. So I think it's the smaller investors that just never considered it.
Yeah, and we're seeing more and more like high income W-2 earners. And then I'm starting to see a lot of them buy these properties. And again, it goes back to the tax write-offs to offset the W-2 income.
Yeah, so that's a big piece that I would say the anybody that's looking to do a cost segregation study to offset W-2 income specific
Mm.
really needs to get an estimate of benefit. That's
Okay.
what we do. We provide estimates of benefit upfront at no cost. Take it back to your CPA to make sure that it's really going to work for your specific scenario,
Mm.
and do it before you acquire the property, because when you're taking depreciation on real estate, it's really in two buckets. You
Okay.
have your passive income and your non-passive or your active income. And rarely do they jump from one to the other. So if you have a high W-2 earner, that's his primary source of income, not a real estate professional, doesn't own real estate professional type service business, then all of the depreciation that we're providing is going to get stuck in that passive income bucket unless
Mm.
it qualifies for a business activity use and they materially participate in that business. So it's really important for people to understand what they're doing before moving forward with an acquisition, making sure that they meet the participation rules, and before they take that depreciation. So talk to your CPA, get an estimate, talk to your CPA.
So I'd imagine CPAs are like your best friend. Like, you do a ton of networking with CPAs.
I would say
Some.
networking, those are really
Yeah.
fun parties.
I'm sure, especially with CPAs.
So I do get a lot of business from CPAs across the
Yeah,
country. They certainly refer business over to us. But I shouldn't just say CPAs because that's like a general term. I should say
sure.
tax preparers, EAs, enrolled agents, individuals that do tax returns, because not all
Mhm.
CPAs are involved in tax returns specifically. So yeah, I would say, yeah, I do network and I work with a lot of CPAs across the
Yeah.
country.
So walk me through how this cost segregation happens. So let's say I'm thinking about buying a property. It's $1 million property. I'm in escrow to buy it. Then I bring you in to do the review to determine if it's worth doing. And then what are the next steps after that?
Yeah, I would say you could even bring us in before you go under contract, before you go into
Okay.
escrow on the property. Just call us and say, hey, run a quick estimate on this property.
Okay.
Once you acquire it, you'd reach out and I just request your closing statement, some basic information about the closing date, the in service date of the property, and then I could work up the estimate of benefit. Once you were ready to move forward, we would go ahead and just, we'd have the proposal sent out to you. You'd move forward with it and we would start the study. It typically takes 2 to 4 weeks for us to turn studies around, depending on the time of year. Right now, our pipeline is definitely filling up, and I know most cost segregation providers across the country are just slammed. And there's a lot of things that go into it. Our studies aren't automated type studies. I definitely would shy away from any company that, says, hey, we can turn your study around in 5 minutes, because all they're doing is plugging in a calculator. They're not actually looking at the property and doing a quality cost segregation report for you.
So do you have someone walk the properties?
So it depends. I'll be inspecting a hotel tomorrow here in Central Florida. I've got another hotel I'm doing next week. I just did a couple of Airbnbs properties this week. So yes, I will walk the properties, but I'm not going to fly out to every single property.
Right.
So we do use a couple of different methods. If I'm not able to do a physical site inspection, I'll order maybe a Matterport 3D scan of the property, or I'll have another company do the site inspection for me. If that's not available, I will literally get on a Google Meet with the client and walk the property and identify the different assets. Per the audit technique guides and the American Society of Cost Segregation Professionals minimum quality standards, they do want a physical site inspection on every property. And we do strive to meet that. But you've got a property up in Anchorage, Alaska, or you've got a condo in Hawaii. Come on, not everybody's flying around the world to do these studies. So.
Right. Now, I wonder, if I'm an escrow to buy a property, could we use a home inspection report?
So I always ask for a copy of the closing statement, the purchase contract, your appraisal, your home inspection report, photos, more photos from the interior. So we're going to ask for those documents as part of the general practice. And here's the reason. It's a heavy lift on the front end, but once you get your cost segregation study done, if you are involved in examination and audit, let's say in 3 years, the last thing you want to do is locate your purchase contract. You might as well just create that folder on the front end where you've got your Dropbox, your Google Drive, where you have all of the documents in one place. That way, when you're talking to the auditor or the examiner and they ask for a copy of your purchase contract, you can just provide it to them. And what they're looking for is they're looking to substantiate the basis of the property. What did you acquire it for? They don't know that. So they're going to want to see the purchase contract. They want to see if there's any, like adjustments that need to be made to the purchase contract. Then they're going to want to see the closing statement to see if there's any adjustments. Was the property included in a 1031 exchange, whatever there was. So getting the documents up front is so key. And it's one of the challenges that, you have when you're selling real estate, working with mortgage lenders. That mortgage lender is doing a heavy lift when it's collecting those documents. For some reason, people just don't keep them.
It's even with the loan officers, I actually tell my clients to get everything even before we enter escrow. So literally all they need is an appraisal and title report and we're done.
Especially when you're in a competitive market and you have really tight timelines. These guys aren't going to monkey around. They're going to say, okay, do your due diligence and sign off in 3 days, 5 days.
Right?
Like, good luck getting a home inspector out there. You better have a friend.
And in some other states I've done business in, the contingencies are automatically released. Versus in California, the buyer has to actively release it. So if you don't have your stuff together and you're buying out of state, the deadline comes and goes. Too bad, so sad.
Read your contract. Yeah. And the other reality too is not all sellers are friendly. They'll keep your deposit, no problem, and move on.
And in some cases, it's warranted. It's not my fault you didn't review the contract. I've had it where even here, people are like, oh, I need an extension on the appraisal. I'm like, we're 2 weeks into this and you haven't even ordered it yet. Why should I give you an extension?
So it's getting it's getting all the documents up front, making sure that when you're talking to clients, they have everything ready to go. And that's a big piece too, because we were talking about design build. I work with a ton of clients that will do what you say. They'll tear down a property and rebuild it, whether it's a small residential or a large commercial project. And they'll be 3 years into the construction and literally not have any documentation as to what they spent the money on. They know they spent $7 million building this building, but they can't identify where the money went or when they spent it. And it's, guys, you're doing yourself a big disservice because you really want to keep track of everything. And now that AI is built right into your Excel spreadsheet, you could just tell it where you spent the money.
Yeah. Yeah. AI is such a great buzzword. Have you seen it affect how you guys are running your business or how it's actually hurting or helping with everything
Yeah,
going on?
every day I use AI for some different aspect of my business. I just actually signed up for Claude, what is it,
Hmm.
Cowork, and I'm playing around with that right now
Okay.
just to improve our efficiencies. So AI is a big tool, especially on more complicated projects. For example, and this isn't a very complicated project, but I just did a cost segregation study on a client who bought a property that had two large wells on it. So what I was able to do in
Okay.
this case is I was able to take a picture of the large wells, and
Okay.
then I was able to upload them right into the AI and just say, hey, give me a breakdown of all the components that are associated with this, because it was something that it's not standard. It's not something that we typically
Sure.
build, because at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're doing construction cost estimating. So we're going in and we're saying, okay, what did that slab cost? What did those CMU block walls cost? How much were those doors? How much was a window and the window treatments and your decorative lights and your can lights and everything else? So it's construction cost estimating mixed with taxes. So it's fun. And one of the really cool things that I get to do, and I alluded to it, I think, is I get to work with a ton of different types of projects across the country, whether it's a
Hmm.
client that's converting, I don't know, I think I've mentioned it before, like an old Kmart into a self-storage facility, or maybe they're building ADUs on properties in Texas, on all the residential properties they're buying up. You're talking about house hacking earlier, and it's what a great opportunity. You own a home, you're grandfathered in, so you could put ADU in the backyard. That's going to be an investment property. Why not build it, do a cost segregation study on it, accelerate the depreciation? It's a win.
Yeah.
It's working with all these niche investors across the country. And since I do get to travel a lot to these different site inspections, I don't do all physical site inspections, but when I do, I go to cool places and you get to see different types of things. And yeah, I really enjoy that part of the business.
What have you noticed? Like, what type of projects are you seeing most of your business coming from? Is it hotels, casinos? Is it the Kmart's turning into storage units? What are you seeing more of now than you may have before?
It's smaller residential investors. I'm seeing a lot
Hmm.
of clients that are buying primarily Airbnbs. So they're
Yeah.
getting into the Airbnb space, and we're doing a lot of studies on them. What's nice is we can go in and we can pull out. I always ask them, provide me a detailed list of any improvements that you made to the property, include all of the furniture, just everything. And we could segregate all that out so that when they turn it into their CPA, it's easy to read. They plug it right into their tax returns and they can move forward. So a lot of Airbnbs.
So these reports, are they similar to a reserve study that condo complexes do?
I think that's a good way to look at it. Yeah. So it's very similar
Okay.
to a reserve study in the sense that we're going in and we're saying, okay, you've got, I don't know, 40,000 square feet of parking area that's
Hmm. Right.
asphalt. The asphalt's been in place for 5 years. It's got a useful life of 15 years. So now we're hitting it with an RCN, so replacement cost new. And then we're plugging in a less depreciation factor. And we're saying, okay, we know the fair market value of this parking lot is X dollars, let's call it $75,000 to replace. The
Mhm.
difference is we're not giving the client a budget to replace it in the future. We're squeezing that number and all the other cost to their purchase price allocation less the land. So they bought the property for $2
Mhm.
million. You have to carve out land because it's a non depreciable asset. Let's call it $500,000. Now you have $1.5 million in sticks, windows, doors, roofing covers, and we just allocate it to all the components of the property. And since I brought that up, I think it's a great idea to talk about the land allocation, because LA specifically, I was just talking to a client earlier today because I did a couple of studies for him. And the challenge with LA County is land allocation is a non-depreciable asset. So we have to back it out of the basis. If you pull a copy of the county tax records in some markets, sometimes it'll be up to 95% of the value is assigned to the
Oh,
land
interesting.
per the county. And you say, okay, realistically, could I rebuild that 3,000 square foot home that I just bought for $3 million for $500,000 or whatever it is? The
Yeah.
answer is no. So if you were to
Right.
assign that 95% land allocation, it's just not realistic. It's not reasonable. So you have to come up with a reasonable land allocation for the market that you're in. And I've seen clients get this wrong time and time again. I'll have clients in San Diego that will assign a 10% land allocation across the board to all of their properties. And I'm like, guys, you bought a house on the beach in Del Mar. You're not giving it a 10% land allocation. It has to be reasonable. You just spent $15 million on the property. You just have to really look at it. So there's 6 or 7 methods that you can use to calculate a land allocation. And prior to filing your tax returns, whether you do a cost segregation study or not, make sure you're not leaving it up to your CPA alone to determine that land allocation, because a lot of clients will just hand them their closing statement and say, I bought this house, you put it on my fixed asset schedule, and then I'll review it a year later and I'm like, oh my God, did they just blow that or what?
Yeah.
They're trying to do 300 tax returns. They don't have time to research your current market's land allocation.
For sure. So really you need ones where the value of the land is lower.
You really need it to be a reasonable land allocation. That's what the
Okay.
IRS is looking for. You want it to make sense for the area that you're in. If you're buying a property in, I don't know, maybe Birmingham, Alabama,
Wow.
land allocation may come in at 8.9%. The rest of it's going to the property. But if you're buying if you're buying coastal somewhere, or maybe in an urban market, you're going to have a lot higher of a land allocation. And this really ties back to condos too. I see a lot of condo investors, because in real estate, you're taught you're only buying the in walls. You only need an in wall policy. You own the airspace. The reality is when you buy a condo, you almost always own a part of the entire project. You own the roof, you own the walls, you own the windows, you own the land that the building sits on. You just own an undivided fractional interest of that project. So you still have to assign a reasonable land allocation to that condo. Unless, of course, you literally only own the airspace. And that is so rare.
Yeah, I do typically read that there's like an undivided interest
Yeah.
in the property. So that makes sense. Then going back to the Birmingham example, and I say that because I actually own rentals out there. And it's interesting because like I'm thinking about like my insurance policies, and yeah, the insurance out there is actually more expensive than people think because it costs more to build than the actual like property. So in those cases, let's say you bought $1 million property in those areas, that means you actually might be able to take more advantage of the cost segregation study because the land would be worth less. So more of the money
Correct.
can be allocated to it.
That's an accurate statement. But you're going to get a really nice property for $1 million.
Oh yeah, no, you can get 5 to 6 or 5 to 10 unit apartment buildings for 600,000. There's stuff over there for over $1 million. I'm like, they're sitting. I'm like, no surprise. It's like you can buy a
Well,
bunch of these little ones to equate the same.
and also, clients ask cost associated with the cost segregation study. So we're
Yeah.
doing small residential properties for under $1,000. We're doing larger commercial properties for thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars sometimes. When I'm looking at different markets across the United States, clients always, they want to know up front, hey, what is it going to cost me? I say, I really need to look at your property,
Sure.
because a $500,000 property in Tennessee may be a horse property. You may have barns, you may have acres and acres with fences and lots of site improvements. But then you go to somewhere in Southern California and $500,000 might be not, it's just
Not
not
horse
that.
property.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
all of
fair
a sudden,
enough.
all of a sudden that $1 million property might cost less to do the study on than a property somewhere else. Because it's all really based on scope of work. How
Sure.
complicated is that project? How many assets are we going to rebuild? So it's definitely interesting when you're looking at the cost of real estate across the United States.
That's fair. It's a lot of it's factored into your time. It's going to take more time to do a segregation study on ones with multiple structures.
Sure.
So that makes sense. Okay. As we wrap this up, what's the one big advice you give people who are considering doing the cost segregation study?
Get an estimate of benefit. It's easy. Just shoot me an email. Go to the website, CostSegRx.com, and engage with us and get an estimate. They're free, but is a little bit of work because we're asking you for some documentation up front. But that's just so we can give you an accurate estimate of benefit. So get the estimate. If it works for you, it works for you. If it doesn't, that's okay too. I'd also say always review it with your CPA or tax preparer. Run the study by them, or not run the study, run the estimate by them. And if they have any questions, they can call me. I'm happy to talk to the CPA because, like you said, I am networking with them. They are a great referral source for me. And I want to make sure that if I do a cost segregation report or study for one of their clients, that they can actually use it, that they're getting the benefit from doing the study.
Yeah, it's a team sport, right? Everybody benefits from it. So,
Exactly.
no, that's great. All right, Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. Besides your website, how can people get a hold of you?
That's it. Super easy.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah. CostSegRx.com. Yep.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And for everyone listening and watching, thank you so much. And I'll talk to you guys next week. Want to keep unlocking the secrets to building real wealth in Los Angeles? Stick around for the next episode. Tap the video on screen to keep watching.